So yesterday, I made a mistake. We have 40-minute slots for each talk, but we ran a 30-minute timer on our first keynote speaker yesterday. If you see, this is Bozhidar here. And because I know you haven't got enough of Bozhidar, this time, in 40 minutes, for real, it's 40 over here, I present you the guy with the birthday today, Bozhidar Batsov.
Hello again. It seems I'm back, which might be good or not. Because you know what, I constantly thought that Stefan Kneff was going to be our secret speaker, and I'm kind of disappointed by the choice of the organizers, but they're just me. Still, I'll do my best. My name is still Bozhidar, and pretty much everything I told about myself yesterday still applies. So I kind of removed this from my slide deck. My handle on Twitter is still the same, and this is the only social media that I still am approving of, something like this. But some things changed since yesterday. Like, I'm 1 year older today, and hopefully a lot wiser. I also had to find inspiration on a rather short notice for the presentation today. You know that there is only one liquid inspiration in Bulgaria. This is definitely not vodka Helloy, trust me. I don't know what you think about Anthony's talk that was just before mine, but he was inspired with the same raw material. I actually did a bonus talk for him as well last night. I was educating him on the fine differences between grape rakia, plum rakia, apricot rakia, and some other flavors of rakia. I think he's enlightened. I think he's going to leave the UK really quickly and move to Bulgaria. But that's just my take on what transpired last night. So, why am I here? 2 reasons. First of all, I have this birthday, and I have this crazy habit of making presents on my birthday instead of receiving presents. It sounds to me that I'm kind of dumb, but it is what it is. The other reason is that I'm not a very calm person, and I'm a perfectionist at heart, which, put in less politically correct terms, means that I really hate shitty code, and I have dedicated most of my career towards eradicating it. You know, every time I see something like this on the internet, a little part of me dies, or maybe not so little part of me. Thankfully, rakia also has regenerative powers. So, this I obviously lifted from the amazing Russian site govnokod.ru, which is truly legendary. And by the end of my talk, it is going to be rendered obsolete because we are all going to be experts in the elements of style. So, the elements of style it is. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with this proposition that languages are hard. And I'm not talking about programming languages. I'm talking about all languages, starting with natural languages. I even have the facts to prove this. Most of us here, I assume, are Bulgarian. And even though Bulgarian has been the native language for us, it still took us somewhere between 10, 12, 15, 17 years to master it. And the vast majority of us miserably failed when it comes to mastering Bulgarian. Throughout my life, I've noticed that the basic use of any language is easy. Now, anybody can do it. Hristo Stoichkov mastered German in a day, English in 3 days. I can order alcohol in at least 15 languages and the Czech. So that's another argument supporting my thesis. But I've also noticed that the correct usage of a language is a significantly harder thing to accomplish, and the effective usage of a language is extremely, extremely hard. When it comes to Bulgarian, for instance, there are very few people who have truly mastered Bulgarian. I'm going to highlight one of them. So forgive me about the very rough translations, but it's very hard to... for our foreign guests, Bulgarian politics are like shit in cellophane, and that's true. I'm never happy about a small pig and a new boss. Everything good in this country was done by us. The others, they can't even paint it. It's really deep and profound. Zhivkov and our king were my two universities. On one topic, they truly agreed that Bulgaria and the country are above everything else. I find it amusing that Bulgaria and the country are something rather distinct here. And this is my favorite. Okay, so it's very hard to translate, but I'll give it my best shot. To squash Tsvetanov is like sitting butt naked on a hedgehog. Maybe. So, do you truly believe that Boyko Borisov mastered Bulgarian in 3 months? Probably not. I think it was a lifetime experience, a lifelong journey. So, yeah, it takes more than 3 months. It's similar to programming languages. I think I already touched upon this the previous 2 times I was here. You cannot teach yourself C in 21 days. 10 years, something more plausible. You should check out my related talk on the subject. In general, it seems that any road to mastery will take you a lot of time, a lot of hard work. It's going to be painful. Maybe fun, maybe painful, maybe both. I don't know. On the other hand, some very smart programmers, like Wari Wo of Pro fame, have been claiming for a very long time that laziness is one of the virtues of programmers. And supposedly, the better you are, the lazier you are, or the other way around, I don't know. I'm a very lazy person, so I hope that makes me a very, very good programmer. We'll see. So in my laziness, I explored all of the shortcuts for achieving mastery of English, which meant I Googled for effective use of English. And this was the first result that I got, this tiny book, The Elements of Style, by William Strunk and E.B. White. It is a truly, truly tiny book. And like always, I brought it with me, but I forgot to take it with me on stage. So I want to show you. Tiny book, 80 pages, full of wisdom. Everybody should read it. So this book is full of very simple guidelines about effective usage of English, a few tips and tricks that are going to make your writing, your speaking better, more impactful, more effective. Like use the active voice, because this sounds more vigorous, more energetic, more direct. I can say that my first visit to Pernik will always be remembered by me, but I would sound like an asshole. Pernik is such a magical place that what I would truly want to say is, I shall always remember my first visit to Pernik. Much better, right? It seems that you don't agree, but trust me, it's better. Another sample of the kind of advice you'd find in the book. The word personally is often unnecessary. For instance, I can say, personally, I love Emacs, but when you come to think about it, everything that you do is personal. So I just fucking love Emacs. Just fucking is not a useless construct. It's a very useful construct. In its essence, the elements of style is something that today we call a style guide. A curated set of supposedly good practices that spare you the process of making trivial decisions. If you're not making trivial decisions, what are you making? Well, you are focusing to solving the problem at hand. And that's a good thing. In an ideal life, a style guide would also be very simple and concise, so you are not going to spend months going through it, and you're actually going to read it. But that's not always the case. In this case, that's the case, an ideal case. Here I'm going to add a small disclaimer before I continue. Style guides are definitely not a replacement for thinking, for common sense. You know what people say, common sense is actually not that common. So, But also the highest level of mastery of every language, of everything that you are doing, is to actually break the chains of style, do something wild, do something crazy, because you know the subject matter so well that you know you're not making something crazy. You probably are wondering, why have I been talking so much about the elements of style, about English, because this is a programming conference, and all of the talks here are supposedly going to make us better programmers. Well, in my mind, this is the best book on programming that was ever written, Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. I have said this numerous times, and this is the single sentence that everybody has to remember from the book. Programs must be written for people to read and only incidentally for machines to execute, which means that the most important aspect of any code base is actually its readability. And when you put it like this, it's not that far-fetched to assume that there are similar rules that apply to natural languages and to programming languages alike. If you bear with me for just a few minutes, I'm even going to scientifically prove this. So let's start with a snippet of English. Here we have some totally ordinary text. Or is it? If you take a closer look at it, you're going to see that it's not even English. It's lorem ipsum, meaning some Latin gibberish. But at the first moment, our brain is not alarmed. You see something with chapter 1. It's well formatted, looks like English. Probably it's English. If you, however, see the same code, the same text formatted like this, crazy paragraphs, all caps, and so on, you are probably going to pay attention to the irregularities much more quickly, because your mind is not expecting this. Your mind is immediately alarmed by the strange layout of the text, and you're like, what the fuck is happening here? I know what the majority of you are thinking right now. English is just an inferior language. Bulgarian is the best language in existence in the entire universe. So probably, if we are dealing with Bulgarian text, the formatting doesn't really matter. Let's try this out. Because we do not have a Bulgarian version of lorem ipsum, I just found a random political article online, because everything to do with Bulgarian politics is like gibberish to me. But when you put it like this on a slide, it looks kind of okay, right? When you reformat it, I'm not sure about you, but it still seems a little bit weird to me. So maybe Bulgarian is not that superior, at least not in this regard. And if we continue with our parallels to the realm of programming, I'll be giving examples with Ruby, because it's a relatively simple programming language that is similar to many of the other programming languages that are widespread today. Okay, we see the simple definition of a method with a very strange layout, and this immediately looks weird to us. If we fix the layout, that's simple but kind of meaningless code. We would typically insert a lot of white space in code to simplify parsing the code by a human brain. The Ruby interpreter itself doesn't care about white space at all. The Ruby interpreter is pretty cool. It doesn't discriminate, okay? You can add the white space. You can not add the white space, and I'm still going to like you. I'm still going to run your program. But I do believe that the human brain is going to have significantly less trouble reading this version than this version. The book, The Elements of Style, has several sections with different type of advice there. For instance, it kicks off with the section Elementary Rules of Usage. And there we have some advice about English, like form the possessive singular of nouns by adding apostrophe S, something like this. Emacs forever. In Ruby, we have similar rules that are guiding some of the usages of the language. For instance, typically, we would form predicate method names by adding a question mark at the end of the method name. We are not forced to do it, but if we do it, our code becomes easier to read. It's immediately obvious that something is a predicate, and our readers are going to thank us for this. I know that this doesn't sound like much, but I feel that I've proven some connection between natural languages and Ruby. And I'm going to carry on doing this. The second section of the book is called Elementary Principles of Composition. There we have advice like make the paragraph the unit of composition. Generally, this implies that if you don't have paragraphs in your text, it's going to be much harder for readers to figure out what you have written. And in Ruby, it's the same. You can dump all of your code at the top level, but if you make the method the unit of composition, or a class, or a module, your code is going to be much easier to follow, much easier to maintain in the future. In English, we have the guideline to omit needless words, which do not add any value to the text. So you can write, he is a man who, but there is a lot of redundancy here. You can just say he. It means the same. You've wasted nothing. You actually made your expression way more direct. You can write something like, her story is a strange one, but you can get rid of the A and this, and her story is strange. Plain, simple, very direct, very powerful. In Ruby, we have exactly the same rules. Every seasoned Ruby developer is going to omit every non-required keyword. For instance, nobody would write the then keyword when you have a multi-line if expression because it's implicit, so we drop it. Nobody would write an implicit return. We just drop it. And I think I'm winning, but I still believe that you don't believe me. So we have to carry on. We have to power through. The next section of the book, words and expressions commonly misused. I really love this one. In English, I've noticed that half the people cannot tell apart the difference between farther and further. So farther is something that you use for distance, and further you use for quantity. So you would say, do we have to go much farther? And you would say, I decided to pursue the subject further. In programming, whoa, there are so many examples, but my favorite one is that in Ruby, we have 4 different equality methods. And 95% of the Ruby engineers out there have no idea what the difference between them is, which from time to time gives birth to some really obscure bugs. Am I winning? Is there a connection between natural and programming languages? You're still not convinced. I'll power through. The essence of the book, however, the reason why I like to use it so often in talks is the final section. The final section is named An Approach to Style. And the advice that the authors of the book give for the use of English is exactly the same type of advice that experienced programmers give about all sorts of code. Be consistent, very important. In English, you can write something like, the user should update his config accordingly, they should also check, but that's not very consistent. This immediately frustrates the reader, it drives their attention away and ruins the train of thought. In Ruby, you can write a method like this, or you can write a very similar method in a very different way. You know, one difference, more differences, and so on. There is no reason to do this in the same code base, and nobody in their right mind should be introducing these kind of differences because the reader is naturally going to be inclined to start wondering, why the fuck is the other snippet different? Is there some deeper meaning to it? Are collect and map not the same method? Is the shorthand version of mapping a method over a collection different from the expanded one? And so on. Who knows? Another key advice from the book, be clear. There are, again, many examples that you can give on the subject of clarity, but probably the simplest one is an advice against the overuse of acronyms because they can be interpreted in some pretty different ways. Like, what is this? Of course. What is this? How many people know what a Terran battlecruiser is? And this is not even a joke. This is a real acronym that exists in Bulgarian, although it's not very popular today. Yeah. So every time you insert something like this in your writing, you are potentially confusing somebody. And it's exactly the same in programming. In Ruby, for instance, many of the special global variables have a shorthand version, which was inherited from Perl. It is completely unreadable, like, what is this? Go figure. But you can also use a much more user-friendly name. What is this? Again, even I don't know. Okay, I know because I wrote those slides, but before this I didn't know. It's a field separator. This, weird, weird, super weird. That's not an example of a global variable. That's how you can potentially format a string in Ruby. But there are other ways that become progressively more and more readable. You can use the sprintf method. You can use named placeholders instead of typed placeholders. And you can use the newer alias format, which I believe increased the readability since the initial version like fivefold. So why wouldn't you be always writing code in the final, most expressive, most normalized fashion? No reason. People keep saying that Ruby is optimized for programming happiness. And maybe it's true. But Ruby is also a huge programming language. And when something is huge, making the right decisions is huge. Is hard because there are many choices that you can potentially make. I will illustrate this with a couple of code examples. I'm very excited to be here again today. And as a programmer, I want to convert my excitement into a short snippet of code into a short program that just outputs 3 times on the screen, hello hackconf. So I can do it like this. I can do it like this. I can do it like this. And if I start playing with the 5 versions of string literals in Ruby, I can provide a few more examples. Kind of weird. What if I wanted to just upcase a few words in an array? I can do it like this. 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 So which is the right way? Obviously, all of them are going to produce exactly the same code. That certainly escalated quickly, and there must be something that we can do to spare ourselves from the decision-making process that is ultimately going to just result in a headache. Headaches are also curable with rakia, by the way. Just saying. Are all of those options worth our while? Well, my opinion is a resounding no. That they are not worth our while. All of those options, that they serve just one purpose, to fuel endless bike shedding discussions. But we can certainly do better. And some brilliant programmers a long time ago figured out that we need for programming languages, just like for natural languages, a style guide. Who of you know who Brian Kernighan is? So few. Oh, you must be so young. And I guess that nobody knows who PJ Plogger is, but he wrote some really famous books back then when C and C++ were actually popular programming languages. Brian Kernighan wrote some even more popular books. He was one of the original engineers working on Unix. He wrote one of the masterpieces of programming, the practice of programming. Really, really influential person and a great source of inspiration to me throughout the years. So they were really, really touched by the message of the elements of style, and they created a programmer version with 56 simple rules. This book was created 40 years ago, but the vast majority of the rules in it are timeless. And they are just as applicable today as they were 40 years ago. Like one of the first rules, format a program to help the reader understand it. Very relevant, right? Write clearly, don't be too clever. I really love this one because many people, when they start to learn a language and find in the reference manual some exotic feature, are immediately drawn by the possibility to use it everywhere that they can. So they can show off, that they can demonstrate their supreme understanding of the language and so on. But a really good programmer is never going to reach out for esoteric features unless they are truly needed. I never use code with double negation, for instance, because I know that this confuses many people. I always use explicit checks. In general, I'm a big believer that we should never be sacrificing clarity for small gains in efficiency. And this is my favorite example ever. This is the most effective way to sum the numbers from 1 to 10 in most programming languages. It is kind of ugly, but it is very efficient. In Ruby, you can shorten this to just a one-liner that I believe is way more expressive, and the performance hit is negligible for 99.99% of the use cases. But what's even more powerful is that there is a faster way to do the summation if you go back to some high school mathematics and remember this formula. So it would give you the same result, and we go to the corollary to something related. Don't diddle code to make it faster. Find a better algorithm. The language is weird because I didn't come up with this myself. I lifted verbatim those rules from the book. Really great stuff. Another set of rules that I lifted from the book. Make it right before you make it faster. I've been in so many cases where somebody optimized the performance somewhere by 80% to result in critical downtime in production. Was it worth it? Probably not. Make it fail-safe before you make it faster. Kind of related. Make it clear before you make it faster. In general, you should be very, very careful every time you try to make something faster. And something also very related and very important. How do people generally figure out that they made something faster? Did they benchmark something? Did they instrument their code? No, they didn't. They maybe used the time Unix command, which is not very reliable, or that they used a very small sample of data to prove their point. And in production, the performance would be radically different. So measuring performance is really important when you're making claims about performance gains. Very basic rules that people still kind of don't learn. What is this? If you are as old as me, you probably remember because every conversation in MIRC in 1995 started with them. Yeah, you can do better. And you're laughing before even I made my point, so I guess this was a very well-chosen example, but the actual point I want to make here is how do you check whether some user has, say, the right to drink? It is really easy to name a method h over 18 if you're a Bulgarian, or maybe h over 13, I don't know. But not all countries in the world have the same age of achieving adulthood, so maybe a better name would be, just saying. Another classic example. This is 40 years old. Don't repeat yourself. Parenthesize to avoid ambiguity. You can be clever and write code like this, but many people are going to be wondering about the precedence of or intent. You can help them not to wonder. Very basic stuff. Keep the code and its command in sync. People think that this is crazy and it doesn't happen, but it happens all the time. This method does blah, blah, blah. It returns an array of results. No, it doesn't. And if you rely on the command, which you might do, you might end up regretting this. My favorite example ever, this is something that actually happened when I was doing enterprise Java development back in the day. Private instance variable for storing age. Private instance, okay? She is righteously furious. It's crazy. There is a lot of bad code out there, and people don't seem to give a fuck. Another very basic example, often I tell people, if there is something really weird in the code, you might consider putting an explanatory command there, and people interpret it like this. Okay. Another timeless classic. Don't comment shitty code. Just fix it. This is a real code snippet, very famous. Dear maintainer, once you're done trying to optimize this routine and have realized what a terrible mistake that was, please increment the following counter as a warning to the next guy. Or girl, this is fucking sexist. I should have updated it, sorry about this. Total hours wasted here, 42. Keep on fighting. Even Yuan, a brilliant guy who has defeated a suitcase at a game of chess is outraged by this practice. But it does exist. I want to mention another more recent source of inspiration with a rather confusing name. There is this really great book which was just published, Elements of Clojure. I consider it the spiritual successor of the Elements of Programming Style. There is almost nothing in it about Clojure, but there is a lot of more modern advice on how to write better code, simpler code, nicer code. It's a small read, again. I think it's just 150 pages by a really brilliant guy. So I highly recommend it. Okay, I hope that by now you're convinced that there are some merits to be trying to simplify code, to optimize for readability, for clarity. But you might be wondering, how do we apply this in practice? Where should I find the rules, the guidelines for my favorite programming language? Turns out that over the course of the years, style guides were created for most of the common languages out there, at least the good ones, I guess. Python kicked off the trend with the legendary PEP8 standard, which documents the basic practices of writing Python code. And I believe that PEP8 served as the inspiration for a lot of guides that followed in the years to come. Java is one language which is very old, and okay, not so old, but in programming terms. And notoriously, it is one of those languages that never got either an official standard. They got it once, and it was not updated for 20 years. That's the document. Google started an alternative document, which is highly regarded in the community, but still after so many years, consensus is kind of missing there. Go, on the other hand, was a very different language. It was created and bundled with a style guide and with a tool to apply many of the conventions in the style guide, so this is pretty cool. JavaScript for many years was even worse than Java, it is interesting how time fixes many problems. I created this talk exactly 5 years ago, and back then, things were like the wild west when it came to JavaScript and coding conventions. Today, almost everybody is using standard.js. It's a style guide and a tool to enforce the style guide. And I think that there is no reason to ever be writing JavaScript code that is not compliant with the standard.js conventions. I was also surprised that in the course of the years, PHP got style guides. So that's good. Ruby eventually got a style guide. This is also good. Clojure got a style guide. Nice. But those style guides are not something that is written in stone. Languages are always evolving. New features get added. Features get deprecated. Better ways of programming emerge and get adopted. And good style practices are constantly evolving, following the evolution of the upstream languages. For instance, when I started out with Ruby over 10 years ago, this was the only way to write a hash map, literal. And today, almost nobody is going to do it if the keys are symbols. We would typically do it like this, JSON style, call it whatever. I think for a while this was known as sexy hash literals, but after 10 years, not so sexy anymore. There is another thing about style with which I want to wrap up our conversation. Okay, it's not a conversation, it's a monologue, but you're going to forgive me. I have a birthday after all. So, Style consistency is actually the thing that is of the paramount importance. It doesn't really matter what your style is. It is very important to have some notion of style. There are several layers, several levels of consistency. Your personal preferences, the preferences of people who are working on a project, the preferences of an entire company, and the preferences of an entire community. In an ideal world, there should be a lot of overlap between all of them. You know, everybody should be doing exactly the same things. But in a non-ideal world, your personal opinion doesn't matter at all. Just forget about it. It's simple as that. Consistency on the project level is of the highest importance. If the code base of a project is not consistent, somebody did a really, really poor job on the project. It is very important that all of the projects within a company have the same code style, that they are very consistent, because this makes it easy for people to move between projects and not spend a lot of time figuring out why something is different, arguing with their new teammates to change something, like in the previous project. So every company who is worth their salt has strongly enforced company-wide coding conventions for every technology that they're using. The community stuff matters a lot, but it is not the most important. The important thing is to have style and to always remember that style is what separates the good from the great. That's all I had for you today. Thank you for having me again. I believe we have 4 minutes for questions, but before we go to the questions, one more thing. I still have a little bit of swag for those of you who want some, and I have a lot of candy here for my birthday, so please come to the stage afterwards. I'd like to share my birthday with you. And are we doing questions or?
I think we either have time for one question or we sing a song for him. Let's sing a song. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Come on! Happy birthday, dear Batsov. Happy birthday to you.
Благодаря ви много. За мен беше чест.